May the words of my mouth and thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Shalom all to our Kosher Torah open forums. I am, of course, your host, Ariel Tzadok. You find me online at KosherTorah.com. This class we are going to talk about the holiday of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. In our Rosh Hashanah class, we addressed issues from a more of a historical point of view before we delved into the astrological, into the mystical. That's what we want to call it. Well, here when we discuss Kippur, I want to actually introduce the topic with what I don't want to talk about before I delve into what I do. You see, it is, I think the proper word is sad, disappointing, that you find a jihad against certain Judaic practices. But this jihad of which I speak isn't an expression of the Islamic religion or people in the name of Islam or anything to do with Islam at all. I'm using the term as a generic concept for religious war. But the ones who are the most zealous in their, in quote, religious war against Judaism and Torah, believe it or not, are atheists. And specifically, atheist Jews. They will try to concoct every single excuse under the sun, usually under the names of biblical criticism or in quote history, which is more of a pseudo-history, to try to state that none of the Torah is real. It's all concocted, it's all make-believe, and therefore the entire religion of Judaism, therefore in their eyes, is nonsense. The Bible is nonsense, God is nonsense, Christianity and Islam is nonsense, and therefore all the religious are nonsense, and on we go. Well, I see these attacks in many Jewish-related websites on the internet and the like. And I thank God that after being a clergy and a student here of these things for, close to 40 years, I have done the research in the background to be able to see through the facades and the baloney of what these types of presentations present. And I find them very disingenuous, and the only thing I can describe them as religious extremists of the atheist type. I tell you this because I know for the vast majority you haven't done the research, you don't know the background, and all their claims about this and that, which sound so legitimate and realistic, are really a bunch of hot air. In other words, there is no validity to these, in quote, biblical criticism views. You know, they can believe whatever they want. I am not here as a proponent of God's truth. I can never have such arrogance to claim I represent God. I assure you I most certainly do not. I am a clergyman. I am a rabbi. I can definitively state and prove that I am accurately and properly representing the ideas and the beliefs and the philosophies from the sources that I have in front of me. That I can clearly show. What you want to do with them is entirely up to you. So now when it comes to the holiday of Yom Kippur, this is something that we've discussed in the past, and I want to begin right now. We all know what Yom Kippur is supposed to be, the Day of Atonement. We all know that we fast 24 hours from sunset, the beginning, till afterwards. Same laws as apply on the Sabbath, apply on Yom Kippur. We don't take showers or any kind of washing for enjoyment's sake. We don't wear any kind of fragrance, no deodorant, but that's the law, unless of course you have a non-fragrant deodorant. We don't wear leather shoes, etc. And no huggy kissy between the husband and wife either. But with all of these things, this is to be the day of forgiveness. The prayers of the day are all, I'm sorry, forgive me for sins, etc. And yet, with all that being said, you have many people who go through the rituals and yet deep down really don't necessarily believe in them. And in a previous class I asked the question, and I will ask it right here. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the day when God forgives us of our sins, does it exist as an objective reality in time and space? Or does it exist as a subjective reality in the mind? If I had the extra time, I'd put on like that Jeopardy theme song music and let you think about it for a while before I answer. Now, of course, Yom Kippur exists on the calendar. It is a day that we observe and we have rituals physically that we have to do. So yeah, I guess it exists in space and time from that point of view. But the essence of the holiday, the essence is its meaning and its purpose. And that is very profound and significant. And if we don't accept or embrace the concept that we really are forgiven and that the day has meaning, then even if you observe the rituals thereof, being that you deny the meaning psychologically inside you, you will indeed not have achieved the atonement for which the day is meant to be. It is a psychological truth. Oh, scratch my head here and wait, and I tell you now, what I just said to you also are the words of Maimonides from his famous code that are actually recorded and brought in Jewish law in the famous Code of Jewish Law. And I'll read it to you in the Hebrew for my religious scholars out there. Shulkhan Arukh or Achaim Siman Taf Resh Zayin. Those of you who want to look it up. Right? Yom Kippur Enu Mechaper Ela Ala Shavim Ha'Ma'aminim Bekaparato. Yom Kippur only atones for those who repent and who believe in the atonement. But the one who, thinks in his heart, what good is it for me? Then it does not. Now, how is that possible? Now understand the concept, because the concept of atonement is important, and it lays the foundation of what we have to discuss about the entire scapegoat sacrifice. Atonement is in the mind. It's a psychological thing. What do you need atonement for? Well, whether or not we're talking about specific, possibly insignificant issues of ritual observance, big deal. But the major problem, I think this is probably the major human problem that affects every single human soul on, in, or around the earth. And that is one thing: guilt. Guilt. Negative energy, if you will call it. Alright, we'll get energetic in a bit. Guilt is the remorse that we feel for things that we feel we messed up. Things that we did wrong, said wrong, felt wrong. Some people are so racked with guilt that they push it out of the conscious mind, and it literally becomes a self-destructive force inside themselves, which leads to all kinds of problems throughout all of one's life. Guilt is a big, bad problem. And as long as human beings suffer from guilt, psychology will always be a lucrative profession. The big movement in Western society today to elevate secularism and atheism as an attempt to remove guilt does not do so, but only makes guilt more repressed, more deep, coming out in more perverted and disgusting ways, the likes of which we see happening globally across the world today. Guilt is a big problem. How do you deal with it? Well, religion has always been one of the, if you will allow me to use the Jungian term, archetypes, symbols, myths, which enables the human psyche to deal with guilt. One of the greatest myths created to address guilt, of course, has been created by the Christians. The whole concept of Yeshu dying for your sins, taking your guilt upon you, and therefore if you only believe in Yeshu, it's very easy, then all of your guilt is transferred. Now, for people who are racked with guilt, to be able to scapegoat it, transfer it, that's actually a great advertising package. And it's a good concept, and that's why Christianity was able to promote its message so prolifically around the world for so many centuries. In other words, they capitalized on a good idea. Now, don't get involved with issues, well, it's not real, it's not historical, it's not, well, whatever, who cares? We're not talking here about the authenticity of religion. We're not trying to validate or invalidate Christianity. I'm telling you about a psychological effect. The Christians have learned how to deal with negative energy. That's a statement. It used to be that same psychological ability to address negativity was also in the Islamic community. Believe it or not, one of the high points of human civilization, highest points of human civilization, was the height of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, before the Crusades. I mean, that was like the golden times, Enlightenment, and everything else. It was a pleasure to live then. Well, Islam should only hold that as their role model to return to. In the Buddhist and other traditions, they have their own ways of dealing with negativity. Now, dealing with negativity is an important thing, because even though I'm introducing this from the point of psychology, we have learned through numerous other source material that the powers of the mind are not limited inside that little noggin on you, or that little coconut on your neck called your head, your brain. Because thoughts are things. Emotions are things. Feelings are things. Negative energy is not just something symbolic. It is something actual. Moments ago, somebody in text asked me a question. How can you tell the difference between an inner emotional struggle and possibly an attack by an actual psychic being in a mental vision? So I was sharing a mental vision that I had prior to beginning our class. Well, my answer to him was simple. There really is no difference between the two. Carl Jung makes a point about this, that our thoughts, that when they are repressed and pushed out of the mind, sometimes can take an autonomous, that means independent, reality of their own. Our sages in Pirkei Avot spoke about this long time, centuries before Carl Jung, which they stated, right? For every good deed you do, you create an angel. For every bad deed you do, you create a demon. When it says that the reward of a good deed is a good deed, and the reward of a bad deed is a bad deed. What we have is energy. Everything is energy. And remember, an interesting tidbit about Mr. Dr. Carl Jung. He is quoted on record as saying that the majority of his analytical psychology he found in the earlier teachings, right, almost a century or so before him, in the teachings of the Maggid of Mezrich, was the top student of the Baal Shem Tov. So the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, apparently Jung recognized as what he was teaching. Baal Shem Tov from the Ari from all of our Torah. So you see the connections. But energy is real. Thoughts are real, emotions are real, therefore negative energy is real. It is not limited to just your mind. Because it floats out of your mind, it can come and take all different kinds of forms. Your personal demons that haunt you can indeed be those creations of your own mind. So whether they are autonomous external entities or autonomous internal entities is really irrelevant. If and when one wants to be rid of a thing, one must identify and therefore differentiate between A and B. But ultimately, they are both as real as one another. I remember many, many years ago, I was approached by a secular, atheist, Freudian psychiatrist who asked my participation in exorcism on one of his patients. And I was, of course, willing to cooperate and work with such a prominent doctor. But I asked him, and I said, in all due respect, Doc, you don't believe in this. Why on earth are you getting me involved? And he says, because my patient believes in it. And he understood his patient well enough to know that if we went through the ritual, that ritual in and of itself would be therapeutic. Because the patient believed in it. You got to believe. You got to believe in the therapy. You got to believe in Yom Kippur, or else it doesn't work. That's not psychology, that's the code of Jewish law talking. Because it's all energy. Everything is energy. You can fast all you want, wear your fancy new clothes, say all your prayers and everything else, but if deep inside you say, I'm not really forgiven. This is all just ritual, boring, who cares? I'm just going through the ropes. You have not tapped into the inner meaning, allowing your psyche to extract and remove your own negativity, therefore having a transformational experience to make Yom Kippur real for you personally. So therefore, here is Yom Kippur. And I'm often asked, well, Rabbi, what about someone who's not Jewish? To which I respond, well, what difference does it make? If you are embracing Yom Kippur as the archetype for what it means, and you are going through the ritual of fasting, and you believe that by doing so and praying to God, God is going to remove your sin. Guess what? He does. And I don't care who you are, what you are, or where you are. I don't care if you're the man in the moon. I don't care if you're a jinn in the desert or whatever. If you pray, you believe, and you fast, you got it. That is the truth of things. So do not underestimate the great power of your faith. Now, the rituals of the observance are not necessarily my point of interest for this class. For those of you who want to learn the specific details of the ritual observance, specifically one thing that is actually important, the exemptions to the fast for those people who are physically and or emotionally, mentally ill. Well, there are numerous sources online. You can Google a search. and you'll find all the specific and pertinent laws that might be applicable to you or your loved ones. Please, I implore you to do it. The Code of Jewish Law is very clear that if there is a medical issue which possibly could create a dangerous situation, exasperating an illness, and if you were to ask the doctor and the doctor said, something probably shouldn't fast, you're not supposed to fast. No, that doesn't mean that you're going to go out and have a 7-course meal, but it does mean that you got to do what the doctor says. In other words, reality dictates. Atonement is a state of mind. It's not magic. It's real. With this understanding, before I even get into the issues of energy, I'm going to share with you an interesting little bit of history. For those of you who will pray the ritual prayers of Yom Kippur, as on every other holiday, there are 4 traditional prayers that are recited. The evening service, the morning service, the additional service called Musaf, and the afternoon service. And only the one day of the year we actually add a sunset service called Ni'ilah. 5th service of the day, 5 prayers on Yom Kippur. In all of them, we recite prayers of forgiveness. They're very repetitive. Their intent and purpose, of course, is, let's be blunt, keep people in the synagogue to keep their mind off of food so that they can focus on the intent and meaning of the day. So out of all the repetitive prayers, maybe one of them you'll mean. Got it. Cool and groovy. But the central part of all the prayer ritual is to be found in the repetition of the additional prayer called Musaf. And the specific referent prayer is called the Avoda service. And what this is a very long rendition of the outline of the service performed by the high priest. It tells you blow by blow everything that happened and everything that occurred. And even though this is more like a narrative, it is read as a prayer. And in it, there are section after section, in which we have words of the confession. Oh God, I have sinned, I've committed iniquity, I've transgressed before you, etc. and so on. And then there would be the time, historically, when the priest would recite God's holy name, which again, remember, was a projection of energy. We'll get into the energy thing in a little bit. And then have the verse from the Torah, which states again, "For on this day atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you from all your sins before God." And as this entire ritual goes through it, in Jewish tradition, it is the only time of the year in which today Jews will literally bow down to the ground, put their forehead to the ground, in acting out ritually the times when this would have occurred in the Holy Temple. Here's an interesting little tidbit. Who wrote this Avoda service, which is the central point of the prayers for Yom Kippur? If you look through most source material, they'll say it's by an unknown writer. But that's not necessarily true. You can go into, surprisingly, one of the oldest prayer books, which is called a Machzor, published in Vitri, France. It's attributed to the classic Talmudic rabbinic commentator Rashi. And Rashi writes in his Machzor Vitri, section 325, that the person who wrote the Seder Avodah was a tzaddik, a righteous man, who has, shall we say, gone off the path. And his name in Hebrew was Shimon Kippah. Shimon Kippah, for those of you who know anything about Hebrew, will recognize right away, that sounds like Simon Peter. Alright? You all know Simon Peter, the first pope of the Catholic Church, the follower of Yeshu himself. Well, where do we actually get information about Shimon Kefa. And I've discussed this in our Orthodox Rabbi Reads the Christian Bible series. But it's interesting to make reference here. In a book called Otzrot HaMidrashim Volume 2, there is a collection of writings on Shimon Kefa, which, in brief, outline the rabbinic history of Yeshu's movement, defining there that they were, as we discussed in our Orthodox rabbi's view of the book of Matthew, that Yeshu and his group were violent extremists. They were a danger, seeking to provoke war with Rome. The rabbis of the Sanhedrin met terrified what these people could do, provoking a war which could lead to a Holocaust. Well, what happened? They met, and one of the great sages of the day, a Hacham, I forget his name. How could I forget his name? Shaul, Hacham Shaul. He was a student of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. He got to the floor and he said to the sages, I will infiltrate their movement and I will subvert it and spiral it away from Judaism. But on the condition that you do not remember me as an apostate or curse my name. They all agreed. That was Shimon Kefa. So the identification of Shimon Kefa is not necessarily Simon Peter, even though that is what he is called, but clearly by role identifies Paul. That's right. According to the Machzor Vitri of Rashi, don't know how true this is or not, I can tell you that's the opinion. The Seder Avodah, the most important part of the Yom Kippur service that every Orthodox Jew in the world is going to recite on Yom Kippur this year and every other, was written by St. Paul the Apostle. Go tell that to the people in Rome and Jerusalem. Ruffle some feathers. Again, we don't have any historicity to validate that. All we have are the opinions that make such claims. Enough for tidbits and sideshows in history. Now let's get into a talk about energy, the real essence and purpose of Kippur. It's kind of strange if you look at the story about a scapegoat. What is really going on? Alright, you can read in Leviticus chapter 16, the entire story. Alright, the high priest gets these two goats. He has a lottery. It's kind of like, grab bag. One goes to God, one goes to the devil. Did I say that? Goes to the devil? Really? Is that really the way we look at it? Let's look at the superficiality, and then I want to share with you some deeper insights. Are we saying that on the holiest day of the year, that God commanded the children of Israel, his people, to offer a sacrifice to the devil? Huh? Does not compute. Cannot be. Impossible. That contradicts the Ten Commandments. Couldn't be. But yet it says what it says, but what does it really say? That is what we have to ask. So, we know the story. You got the two goats. You would have the high priest. He sends all of the sins of the entire people onto the goat. Then sends the goat out to the other side. Got it. Understand. Or do I? Somebody writes here, give the devil his due. Well, that's a very nice phrase, but where do we have an actual religious source for that? So let me set the record straight by quoting to you first from one of the standard Torah commentaries by our Rabbeynu Bahya. And this is his commentary on Leviticus chapter 16, verse 7. And I have the English version here, translated by Rabbi Eliyahu Monk. Very nice set of books. I highly encourage their acquisition. And let me read to you Rabbeynu Bahya, and I quote. It is most certainly not the intention of the Torah to suggest that this scapegoat be presented to Satan, as an offering, a sacrifice. There is simply no sacrificial service performed in Judaism whose address is not to God, God's essence, not even to any of the attributes. After all, what sense would Exodus 22 verse 19 make, where we are told that if someone offers a sacrifice to any other than God in his capacity, as God exclusively, that one would be guilty of death? Does then the Torah contradict itself in Leviticus, reneging what it's written in Exodus? Of course not. Alright? So what is the real issue here? Well, he states like this. The fact that this Azazel, remember it says it goes to Azazel, will become a beneficiary of the sacrifice which is presented to God in accordance to God's instruction. It says, does not need to bother us as long as that secondary beneficiary, Azazel, is not the address of the sacrifice. The high priest first offered the 2 he-goats as a gift to God. The very fact that the decision of which of these he-goats would arrive at its ultimate address via the detour to Azazel was determined by lot, made it possible, alright? It says here, it made it impossible to accuse the high priest as having aimed one of these animals as a gift or a bribe whatsoever to Azazel. Because it was God that determines the lot. And it's God who makes this decision. Therefore, it's God and everything goes to God. Now, this is important. This is very important to understand. Because in the Torah point of view, there is no duality. The concept of duality is actually Zoroastrian, Old Ancient Persian. It was adopted into Greek philosophy and later into Christianity and even into Islam. That there are dueling powers in the world. God and the devil. They are equally matched and duking it out for your soul. And if you don't get it right, the devil's gonna get you. From a Torah point of view, that is a very unfriendly myth. One just need read the introductory chapters of the book of Job to recognize that the one who we call the devil, Satan, the word Satan is not a name, it's a title, it means the accuser. And that he is actually a very faithful and loyal servant of the heavenly court. It is his job to find wrong and to address it. Within that context, we have this issue of the transference of this negative energy. To address this issue, I want to quote to you from Rabbeynu Bahya just a wee bit. He's going to bring us down something called a midrash. A midrash is a story. A midrash can very well be said to begin with the words, once upon a time. Because it is meant to relate to us a symbolic understanding of a thing, and not necessarily its actual, real application. So Rabbeynu Bahya continues, and he brings down what he calls a midrashic approach, or if you will, a moralistic interpretation of this from the book called Pirkei D'Rebbe Eliezer, chapter 46. And he states that Satan was complaining that whereas God had given him authority over all the nations, he had not given him any control over the Jewish people. God responded that on one day of the year, namely Yom Kippur, Satan would have authority over the Jewish people in the event that the latter were sinful. So the Israelites then were given an opportunity to satisfy the aspirations of Samakel by offering him a bribe. Whereas the offering presented to God was a burnt offering, the one offered to Samakel, also known as Azazel, was a sin offering, which was burdened with all the sins of the people of Israel. This gift to Sam was designed to deflect his intentions to thwart the value of Israel's offerings on that day. By, in quote, playing up to the ego of Samakel, God hoped to neutralize him through flattery, so that the purpose of the Day of Atonement could be achieved without interference from that source. When, as a result of receiving the, in quote, bribe, Samakel realized that on that day the Israelites were like angels, not eating, not drinking, etc., he too joined the chorus of Israel admirers, telling God that Israel were as free from sin as the ministering angels. Once God hears the testimony of our perennial accuser, he grants atonement to the people, to the priests, and to the entire congregation. And let's conclude that section from Pirkei D'Rebbe Eliezer with the words, "And they lived happily ever after." You see, people will read a story like this and mistakenly interpret it to be somewhat realistic. Yeah, that's what's going on. Well, no, it's not. This is only a story to help us understand. You want to understand now? Well, then we have to go a wee bit deeper. To continue, Rabbeynu Bahya writes something. He says that the word Azazel, which is, if you will, again, the address to which the one goat goes, he says, he continues to expand on the meaning of this from the writings of Ramban Nachmani, and he states that he suggested that the name Azazel is a form of reinforcing the meaning of the word Az, Ein Zayin in Hebrew, which means strong, hard, or obstinate. And he claims that the satanic forces, to the extent that they too are rooted in the divine, remember, everything comes from God, seeing that there are no competing forces to God unless God himself had created them and given them their authority. Therefore, all these names end with the letters Aleph, Lamed, El, which is a form of the name of God. Therefore, the name Azazel could be understood as Aziel, or my strength is from God, or something to that effect. He finds an allusion to this satanic force being described as strong or hard in the words of the Psalms 35:10, Matzilani mehazak mimeno. God saves the poor from the one who is stronger, chazak. This is a reference being to Psalm. Now, this is revealing to us a very important point. You see, let's talk energy now. God indeed did create our universe with, if you will, positive and negative energy fields. Maybe this is a reflection of what we can call positive and antimatter, positive or dark energy. I mean, we have all kinds of discoveries in modern science which very well might be the actual scientific definition of what we're dealing with. But what we are dealing with is real energy. Actual, functional, scientifically measurable energy. Thoughts are scientifically measurable energy. Feelings, power, all of this is real. God, whatever God is, set up a system wherein which the psychological, mental, emotional energies, which are real, have a way of being, if you'll allow me to use a colloquial, are washed away. In other words, put into the washing machine, cleaned up, neutralized, redirected, whatever kind of words we want to describe it as. There is a physical ritual corresponding to the physical world in which we live, and then there is the internal world corresponding to the internal world in which we live. And remember Maimonides in the Code of Jewish Law, if you don't activate the internal, the external doesn't work either. Go get yourself the best automobile on the road. Brand new, clean, and everything else. It's not going to turn on if the gas isn't in the tank. It's not going to work if you don't have an electric charge for your electric motor. You need the juice to get it to go. And that is the same with Yom Kippur. God knew this right from the beginning. And that is why this ceremony was instituted. Does God really need for there to be a goat sent out to Azazel? Again, it's a Jeopardy question. And the answer is yes. But wait a second, why? I mean, if this is all energy, why do we need something physical? And the answer clearly is because we live in a physical world. You will not get anything accomplished in the physical world if it's not physical. That is a law of energy. Let me continue with the wise words of Rabbeynu Bahya. According to Pirkei D'Rebbe Eliezer, chapter 27, Samakel, who we are identifying as Azazel here, started out as a respectable angel in the celestial regions until he and his colleagues were expelled from there by God himself. Now it states here that as Samakel came down, as a result of his expulsion from heaven, Samakel constitutes a barrier between earth and heaven. Now, how then can our sacrifices reach heaven when Samakel forms an effective barrier to their ascent to heaven? This is the issue. You see, I will explain this as the Ariel explains it. We live in a reality. Remember, we referred to it in the Bible as eating of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. What exactly was that? We have an entire series on that in our classes from the Ariel. But to sum it up real simple, it means that when our consciousness emanated down to this physical domain, we literally lost connection with higher domains. We are essentially blind to them. We are not cut off from them at all, but we are blind to them. Because there is an energy dampening field that literally surrounds our planet like a shell, or what the Ari would call a klipah. And that is the force of an entity, a conscious, thinking being, who is called Samakel. Samakel was one of those entities who came down to earth. Remember Book of Enoch? Remember Genesis 6, the sons of God coming down, taking the daughters of men? Well, before they're coming down in flesh and blood, they descended through higher ethereal dimensional planes. And literally, this one, allowed by God, created an entire klipah, husk and shell around our planet. And his presence acts as a dampening field, a jammer, which prevents all of our thoughts, our emotions, our positive and negative energies from bouncing off the planet. Oh, we're trapped. You betcha we are. And you know why? Because there's so much negative energy emanating from our planet, from our domain, from this dimensional plane, that it has to be limited and locked up. And the job of Samakel is to keep it locked up. He is the jailer, ordained so by God. He is a dampening field. He is more an it than anything else too. And as such, that is what the Ari calls the klipah. Well, being that we're kind of stuck, everything bounces back off of that. That's why our souls always reincarnate. We come back because we can't evolve and go beyond. We're stuck. Well, what do? Well, being that this is energy, and energy modulates within a frequency. The frequency called Samakel is limited within certain bands, which we call in the Kabbalah dimensional planes. And therefore, when we're able to recalibrate mental thought and emotional feelings projected through specific ritual actions, we are able to, if you will, tune into a higher frequency and completely circumvent the limited domain of the modulations of Samakel. Samakel was put there by God to serve a purpose. He's not there to be the devil to thwart God. He's there doing God's job. What then? How then do we recalibrate? Think about this in the point of physics. Stop thinking about this in the point of religion. If and when you have a radio frequency and you're getting static, you got to fine tune it. You got to get into a clearer frequency. If and when you are covered with smuts, dirt, or whatever, you take it off. So on one day of the year, God has ordained a ritual system wherein which, through fasting, the physical body and the powers thereof are weakened. That's why you don't eat food. It literally weakens ever so slightly the physical energies of the body, and therefore enables the mental energies of the mind and the emotional, the energies of what we call the heart, to dominate. And during that time of dominance, all the guilt, all the negative energies which cling to us, we literally go through a ritual of extracting it from us and putting it somewhere else. In the days of the temple, this was done in an actual way, wherein which a specific animal, literally, realistically so, would be the recipient of that negative energy. If you had Carillion photography available in the days of the first temple when this ceremony was performed, and you could film the crowd, you would see a large cloud of grayish, brownish energy rising out of the entire population, congealing into a smaller form and going onto the body of the goat. It was an actual, real removal of the negative energy from the people and into the body of the goat. This is a great Havdalah, separation. This could be only ordained by and officiated by God and God's conduit on earth, the high priest. Then what happened to this goat? He didn't slaughter it. He didn't offer its blood on the altar. But rather you would take the goat and, as it says, you'd throw it off a cliff. In its breaking up, that negative energy was dissipated in a non-populated area. That's why it was taken out into the wilderness. And that negative energy, therefore, could be dissipated away from human contamination or human infection. And as such, it would then dissipate and go into what we'll call the ethers. Absorbed into the klipah belt of Azazel. And it was his job to collect that energy, to receive it, and to neutralize it. That was his job. God set him up for that. And then the children of Israel, free of that negative energy, at that time could receive what was called shefa, heavenly energy, which could come down and would materialize in their minds, in their hearts, and physically in their bodies, and physically materialized as blessings in health and wealth and protection and all good things as outlined in biblical prophecy and promises. So it was an actual transference of real energy. Now, there are entities in this world who inhabit our ethers. They are of a different vibrational frequency than we are. In Arabic, they're called the jinn. Genies. Maybe you remember Barbara Eden from I Dream of Jeannie back in the 1960s? Well, boy, how many of us young men would have wanted a genie like that? In Hebrew, they're called shadim. But a point that is understood in both the Kabbalah And I might add, even in Islam, more than in traditional Judaism, because they had a lot more understanding and insights. They have an entire chapter on jinnin in the Quran. They understood that jinn, like human beings, actually, we cover this in the Avoda Rabbeynu, a lot of them serve God. A lot of them consider themselves to be religious by human religious standards. A lot of them seek to work with human beings and to serve God. We have a very famous example from the Talmud of Ashmodai, the king of the demons, who actually helped and worked with Solomon to build the Holy Temple. And that many of his dominions worked and did the work. Of course, there are other stories which try to relate negative elements about him, but for those in the know who recognize the, shall we say, apocryphal nature of such stories. But the concept of Solomon being master of the demons is a well-known thing. There was an entire book, the Testament of Solomon. If I'm not mistaken, to this day it's considered part of the Apocrypha. Very well known and readily available. Well, you see, in Islam they always knew this. Judaism, while the Talmud echoes teachings like this, you'd have to go into the later Kabbalah to really find the teachings of this, because it just really lost contact. But it's been always known in Judaism that the other side is meant to be nourished by God, because God Himself is the author of such things. Rabbeynu Bahya writes about this, and I quote again. He says, "It's not forbidden in principle to feed the appetite of our adversaries, placed there by God Himself, as long as we do not feed their appetites at the expense of our spiritual integrity, and as long as we perform such a procedure at God's command. So the reason is that by doing so, we are like the servants of the Lord who share our gifts on behalf of the Lord to the ministers of the Lord, in order for those ministers not to object to the way the Lord wants to deal with us." For many of you are familiar with Jewish ritual traditions, especially in light of the Kabbalah of the Arizal. There are a number of ways in which we very ever so subtly give support and nourishment as God so demands. There is the tradition of the final washing of the fingers before saying grace after meals, in Hebrew called Ma'im Achronim. It clearly states that that water is, if you will, for the dark side. There are little hairs that come out between the third and the fourth box of the tefillin that are worn in the head. We say again, that's an emanation that goes to the dark side. All these are obviously symbolic expressions. But you see, in the duality myth of the Zoroastrian, Greek, and later Christian mythology of God versus the devil, that's given the evil. But that's not the way it's looked at. That's not the way it was meant. God is the author of good. God is the author of evil. Where did I learn that from? Oh, that's right, from some guy. What was his name? Oh, Isaiah the prophet, chapter 45, verse 7, if I'm not mistaken. All right, maybe verse 10, I forget. God is the author of good and evil. We have obligations. The high priest had the obligation to make sure on this day that the entire system of operation functioned in accordance to the mechanical operations as God ordained the universe to operate. So therefore, that's why this goat was ordained. It wasn't a gift or an offering to the devil. It wasn't giving him a dog is due. Satan was a clear servant, almost like a Kohen himself, participating in this. His job was to take this specific negative energy and to neutralize it. A lot of the entities all around the jinn, the shadim, they feed off of this negative energy. But then many of it is food. And that is why we are commanded throughout the Bible not to approach these entities and offer them any semblance and form of energy. That kind of makes you look in their eyes to be like a cow waiting for the slaughter. when those people want to go and make offerings to the earth force entities, they don't look at you as an equal who's giving them a gift to which they say thank you. On the contrary, in their eyes, they're looking at you as a hamburger, putting yourself on a plate to be eaten. Not a good idea. That is why we have the laws underlying why we have to separate from them. In a comparative book to Rabbeynu Bahya called the Tziyuni, Rabbi Menahem Tziyuni goes and elaborates all about these entities and how they actually nourish off of this energy and how they interact with human beings. He goes into a long digression in his Parsha Acharei of how many of these entities seek contact with human beings based upon the Talmud, how they actually can sexually procreate with human beings, and how through that sexual procreation they create hybrid entities, half human, half jinn or shed, or combinations of both dimensional planes. It is said that Adam and Eve were involved in this, and that this happens to this very day. And when you read the traditional legendary stories of these types of copulations, and you put them side by side with modern stories of alien abductions and, in quote, sexual experimentations, the details of both sets of stories seem to match point by point, which makes one to have to speculate, is there a connection between the two? I'll let you connect the dots without having to go there. So on this Yom Kippur, somebody's asking, is this physical or ethereal? To which I again respond, there's no distinction between the two as we might think. Yom Kippur is real if you believe in it. So as we recite the Avoda, thanks good old Paul, if he's the one who wrote it, alright? And it tells the story. That is the point in the synagogue that you should pay attention to. And if you're not in synagogue, or if you're not even Jewish and you want to participate, that's the story you read. I'm sure you'll be able to find a version of it online in some PDF form somewhere. Read the story. Visualize it happening. Visualize your negative energy being literally taken out of your physical body, out of your emotional body, out of your mental body, and being taken out of you and put onto some other form, being dissipated, neutralized. Therefore giving you a higher vibrational frequency through which to tap into God and the heavenly energy, to become God's conduit, God's priest, God's Merkava, through which you then become the conduit of blessing for the earth. This is the true service of, and fulfillment of, and practice of Yom Kippur. This is why we fast, is to ever so subtly break the neutral energy bonds of the body. This is why we don't wear leather shoes. It's supposed to go barefoot and feel the earth through it. Why? Connecting energy. That's what it's all about. Everything is energetics. Now you understand the secret of why they perform this strange, bizarre ritual with this goat. It wasn't an offering to the devil, but rather it was a way of neutralizing the energy, and the devil was just doing his share of the work as God's faithful servant. So therefore, whether we're talking about Shedim or Jinn, or the other dragon entities called the Tali, who I did not mention, but who Rabbi Tziyuni does, all of us are equally living in an energetic reality. And all of our functions, our actions, our deeds, our words, our feelings, and our thoughts are all energy. And if we handle existence energetically, learn the laws of energy. Go and take science classes online. Learn how energy flows, dissipates, grows, weakens, etc. Follow those principles in your religious, spiritual observances. And indeed, it will transform you psychologically, emotionally, physically, and most certainly religiously. That is how we observe Yom Kippur from year to year. Again, with regards to specifics of observance, what time does the fast start or end? Fine. Go online, do your search, and you will learn. Sean here in text has very correctly, astutely wrote one word: thermodynamics. You got it. You remember what the laws of thermodynamics are? When you have a concentration of energy in one place, it's the nature of things to dissipate it. Because in a closed system, energy likes to balance out. The energy of God is like that. You have waves. Okay? When there's a concentration of negative energy, it needs to be neutralized, it needs to be balanced out. Concentration of positive energy, there's always the force to try to neutralize it. Our job is to concentrate positive, to neutralize negative. It's all energetics. This is how it all works. My prayer, my blessing, my prayer, we should get this message, that we should learn to see things energetically, live energetically, with the hope and the prayer that we can actually contribute to making this world of ours a better place. To project positive and good energy wherever it is needed, to whatever race, entities, beings, whoever, wherever. Project the positive energy. Neutralize the negative. Project it into the Middle East. Project it into the politics of your country. Project it into the people that you know and love. Project it everywhere into anything. And you, like the high priest, will be serving to make peace between heaven and earth. That is the energy of Yom Kippur and the secrets of the goat. May God bless us all. Thank you again all for joining me. Have an easy fast. With God's blessings. See you all in the next class. God bless. Good night. Shalom. 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 Good night. Shalom.